My name is Benjamin Locke. I'm with a company called Cogeneration, and I'm going to talk about combined heat and power systems, or cogen, otherwise known as CHP, all kind of mutually used to describe this. And I'm going to take it a little step further. I'm going to talk about a specific type of CHP using some technology called variable speed operation. It's kind of an advanced course in CHP, but for folks like yourselves who may be in this presentation wanting to know about how your building can save money, this particular CHP equipment can save you a lot more money than other types. So first off, quickly, who knows what CHP or cogeneration is? Couple folks do. Okay, perfect. So anyway, I'm going to go through, I'll describe what CHP is, and again, if you've got a building, how it can save you money, what the technology is without going into too much detail, but specifically this variable speed operation technology. And then talk about some of the supporting architecture that comes around CHP systems, like cloud-based monitoring, dashboards that you can see on your mobile device, et cetera. And then give a few examples so you get a feel for how these systems are installed in the New York City area. So first, what is CHP? How do you spell it? Well, CHP, again, it stands for Combined Heat and Power. Which the rigid definition is you have one fuel source in, you get two sources of energy out. So in a practical sense, you put in a CHP system in your building, and your fuel source is natural gas, which is very inexpensive in the New York area and plentiful. And your two sources of energy that come out of it are electricity that you use in your building and hot water that you also use in your building. And by generating those two things simultaneously, the efficiency of it is much more efficient, and efficient, by the way, means saving money, much more efficient than if you were to buy your electricity from the electric grid, from Con Ed, or if you were to make your hot water using your existing boiler. So the way it works is you essentially have an engine here that's in your building. That's what this is. This is an engine. It runs a generator, much like a Sears generator, you know, and it makes electricity in its simplest form. That electricity goes into your switchgear in your building, and it's providing all that electricity into your building. Now, your building is still going to have some electricity coming into it from Con Ed, you know, to handle those peaks when all the elevators and hair dryers turn on at once. But you're base loading your electric load with this piece of equipment in your building. And as a result of the generating process of making the electricity, there's heat generated, just like your car makes heat. You take that heat and you purpose it into the building. So now when people flip on their showers, instead of your boiler turning on, it's going to take that hot water, that heat, from this CHP unit and use that. Now, when everybody takes a shower at once, again, your boiler is going to kick on, just like Con Ed's going to kick in when everyone turns on their hair dryers. The point is, you've base loaded your building with this CHP equipment that is the most efficient and savings part of your building. And there's real savings in that, particularly in New York, when electric rates are the highest there are in the country. And you all probably know that. You all see your electric bills. It's crazy how much your electric rates are. So fundamentally, this is a cost-saving measure. There's efficiencies, there's environmental benefits, there's lots of other benefits to it, but where the rubber hits the road is you're saving money by installing these things into your buildings. So that's what CHP is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more detail exactly what Cogeneration has done. So again, there's the diagram. You can see that blue thing is an engine. It's like a car engine. It's not a turbine. It's not a fuel cell. It's not a solar panel. It's not any of these things. It's an engine, a very reliable engine that, again, turns the generator, and then that electricity goes into this box. It's called an inverter. I'll explain what that does in a minute. And then it plugs into your electrical switch gear in your building and generates the electricity. So now you've relocated your power to be on site. Now the real benefit or additional benefit to this is 99.9% of the time this CHP unit is running in your building, and you want it running all the time, right? You want it running 24 hours a day as long as you can, because as long as it's running, it's saving you money. But that 1% of the time, or that 0.5% of the time, if the grid were to go down, this thing can continue to run. Because when the electricity goes down, when Con Ed goes down, natural gas doesn't get interrupted. And all the storms, Sandy, and some of these other electrical outages, natural gas kept flowing. So this thing will continue to run and continue to power your building through an outage. Now, you can't run everything in your building, but you can run your elevators, you can run your water pumps, so you can flush your toilets, you can have a common area lighting, you can have the bare essentials that you need to survive an outage. And that's just an added benefit. I mean, most people, again, you're installing CHP to save money in your building, but you have this resiliency piece, this assurance that if the grid goes down, you're going to keep the fundamentals of your building running. Very, very important here in New York City, as you can imagine. So why CHP and why now? Well, a couple of things have happened in the past few years. Of course, plenty of natural gas these days. It's accessible. It's relatively inexpensive. In fact, if you install a CHP system into your building, you get a little bit of a discount on your gas rate. If you're paying $1 a therm to run your boiler, you might only be paying 75 cents a therm to run your CHP system. Con Ed gives you a discount on the gas. And then juxtapose that with the graph below, where its electric prices are just going up and up and up. And it's not just because of fuel to generate the electricity. It's mainly because here in New York City, the grid is so constrained and so outdated and so in need of repair that all the infrastructure is what's driving electric rates around here. And again, you probably have seen your own electric bills. You see, electric rates of, 13, 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And then the real killer is this thing called demand charges, where the utility monitors your building, of course, and each month, whatever your peak usage was for that month, that one day when all the air conditioners and all the microwave ovens are on, they note that, and then they multiply that by $30, and that's what's called a demand charge. Many times, that's what dominates your electric bill, these demand charges. So this tool, this CHP, is designed to get that bill way down, and there's a cost to install it. You get savings each year. It pays itself off. That's how the economic model works. So the other driver, again, this resiliency piece, very, very important to people. A lot of the systems that we installed prior to Sandy, they installed it simply for the economic savings. And then Sandy happened. They got this, the CHP kept running, and they were able to run their buildings, take their elevators, flush their toilets. This one building in New York was able to do it for 6 days, the Bavort, down in the Lower East Side. So they were able to, in fact, they had 3 of these CHP units because their building was big enough to not just put one in, but to put 3 of them in. And so they had plenty of power to ride themselves through an outage. So this resiliency piece really has people on front of people's radar as they start thinking about grid resiliency and grid reliability. And as I mentioned before, there are environmental benefits. Some of our buildings are LEED certified. Our equipment counts towards getting LEED points. The environmental footprint of your building is very important to some folks. This ultimately is reducing your greenhouse gas footprint of your building. So Tecogen, who are we? Well, we have the largest and longest CHP manufacturer in the United States. We've been around for a long time. We were part of a much larger company called Thermoelectron. If any of you from the Northeast might have heard of the company Thermoelectron. But we became a private company around 2000. But we've got CHP systems all over the country, and as you can see there, we follow basically the electric rates. It's kind of called what we call the spark spread. It's the difference between electric rates and gas rates. You want cheap gas, high electric rates is where we install our equipment. Folks say, you should be installing your equipment in Puerto Rico. Electric rates are really high and they need resiliency. Yeah, but they don't have plentiful natural gas there. It's very expensive propane in these remote places. But here in New York and on the East Coast, and as you can see on the West Coast, widely available natural gas, very high electric rates, perfect candidates for CHP systems. And very importantly, as I mentioned before, the key to the CHP is having the equipment run, of course, just like your car. And to have it run, you need to keep track of it and have it serviced by us, the factory service people. So as a result, we have factory service centers all across the country, and most notably, you can see in New York, those red stars. We've got 6 of them in the Northeast alone, 3 in the New York area, the metropolitan New York area alone, 1 in upstate. And these are Tecogen people driving Tecogen vans with computers, and I'll go into some of the remote monitoring and things like that. But that's very important to make sure that these things are running and saving you money. I'd say that the main characteristic of Tecogen is ultimately we're a bunch of engineers. We've been developing technology, CHP technology, for 30 years, 40 years, always innovating. And the product I'm about to show you now, our flagship product, is a result of the recent innovations we've been doing. So I like to say we're innovators, not imitators. There's other CHP companies out there. You can buy an engine, you can buy a generator, you can put a heat exchanger under, and presto, you've got a CHP system. But is it the most economical? Is it the most efficient? Is the company have good standing? Has the company been around for a long time? Those are the things that differentiate Tecogen from anybody else. Hi, come on in, have a seat. So again, we've been at this for a long time. I'm not going to go through in all the detail of all these milestones. I think the most important milestones you'll see there on the far right, which is we released this second generation E+, Inverde E+ is the name of the product. I'll talk about that in a minute. It offers the most savings in this VSO technology that I'm going to describe in a minute. But also very important is you see that second to last one, this Ultera emissions technology. Again, this is an engine, and engines have exhaust, and people say, naughty, naughty, you're polluting the environment with this exhaust, particularly in California. So I'll show in a few slides, the exhaust that comes out of our engines are as clean as a fuel cell. We've got emissions after treatment system that takes all the NOx and CO, these are the things that cause, smog and people have air problems breathing, down to levels almost negligible, again, like a fuel cell. So for folks that have been very concerned about their greenhouse gas footprint and concerned about air quality, these things operate as very cleanly. So what are the products? So these are CHP products, what you're seeing on here. The one on the left is a product that we've been installing for decades. It's kind of the workhorse of the CHP world. It does everything I said. It provides your building electricity, provides you hot water, saves you a lot of money. Very good thing, but this particular piece of technology does not provide that black start capability. It doesn't provide you that power during a grid outage. It's less expensive than folks that maybe they already have a backup generator, right? So they don't need this backup piece. That's a very good product for them. It doesn't have some of the bells and whistles of our product on the right, which I'll talk about next, this Inverde E+. That has the best savings because of some of the technology I'll talk about in just a minute. And again, it's got that black start capability where it can run during an outage with no restrictions from the utility. And I'm going to circle back to that point in a minute because the utility is very careful about what they'll allow to operate isolated from the grid for safety reasons. And then that one in the middle is a smaller unit. It's 35 kW. Typically, we'll install these units, and I'm sorry, I should have started off with this. Where do you install this? You want to put this in a building that uses a lot of electricity, of course, and uses a lot of hot water. So it's not going to go in a 10-unit apartment building. It's going to go in a 150-unit apartment building, a 300-unit apartment building, or larger, because they use a lot of hot water, and they have, by definition, a lot of electric use. So you're looking at multifamily buildings of around, certainly over 100 units, probably around 150, 200 units. We've got 6 units running in a 1,000-unit building here in New York. We just scale up the number of units we install based on the building size. But that's back to what I was saying. That small unit's a 35 kW. You could fit that in, say, a 50-unit apartment building. It's scaled down a little bit. Most of what I'm going to be talking about here is that unit on the far right, the Inverde E+, and all the savings that provides and the black start capability that provides. So we are pretty unique. People use the word microgrid these days to talk about things, and I frankly don't think most people even know what a microgrid is. A microgrid is the ability to run separate from the utility and provide the building all the power from your unit. So that's what we're able to do. Now, all of your buildings, I'm sure, are connected to the utility. You're getting the savings. But again, if the power were to go out, you become what's called islanded. You're an island. You're a little kind of power plant into yourself. And again, the ability to do that is very difficult and very hard and very complex for the utility to accept that. But the utility does have a very clean and quick interconnect process, it's called, for specific technology, specifically this inverter-based technology. That's why we call it the inverter, you probably guessed. So I'll describe what that means in a minute. So our electricity that we make, and again, I use the analogy of a generator. It's an engine turning a generator. That power that comes out of our generator is completely unusable. It's frequencies all over the place, voltages all over the place. It's not usable power. But it goes through this electronics cabinet, this inverter cabinet, that actually turns that electricity into DC first, direct current voltage, and then inverts it back into AC, and then it goes into your building as 480 volt, clean, 3-phase power, everything that you're needing. So what does that mean to you? Well, the utility here in New York will only allow certain types of cogenerators to operate during an outage. And it's only inverter-based. And there's this other technology called synchronous, and I won't bore you with how synchronous works. It's a little bit different, though. And it's got inherent safety concerns with the utility. And so what you see here is a map of the Bronx. And you can just Google, Con Ed, CHP map. And you'll come up with all 5 maps for the 5 boroughs. But I show this Bronx as an example. And as you can probably guess, there's red zones and green zones, and the red zones are where you can't put in synchronous generators at all. The green zones mean maybe you can install a synchronous generator if you go to Con Ed on bended knee with all of your documents perfectly collated, and even then, you're not sure if you're going to get an interconnect permit. It's probably very hard for you to see, or maybe you can see it here, but on the red it says DC generation with inverters or induction. That's the ones that don't have black start, so that doesn't matter. Can be installed anywhere. So this is your ticket. Having that green cabinet, having that Tecogen Inverte green cabinet allows you to install these things anywhere in New York, in Manhattan, the Bronx, without these restrictions from Con Ed about getting interconnect. So that's a very important aspect to this because you don't want to have concerns with Con Ed. Was there a question?
Why would Con Ed have those red zones?
Because I'll try to explain this. So synchronous generators have the ability, if there's a fault, think of a fault. Think if you cross your wires in your light, right? That's a fault. If there's a fault in that generator, in that synchronous unit, it can feed into the street and do a lot of damage to connectors and all sorts of gear that's in the street. So Con Ed goes, ooh, no, God, no, I don't want that. But the inverter, by its definition, is a very smart piece of electronic hardware. It's got software algorithms and everything that know if there's any disconnects or any faults and prevents it from backfeeding. And it wasn't Tecogen that convinced Con Ed of this, not me. It was the solar guys that went and fought the good fight with the utility to say, look, if you've got an inverter between your generating source and the utility, it's safe for the following reasons. So we kind of followed behind the solar guys to get our interconnect. It's a good question, though. That's very important because, again, as I started off with, the Con Ed electrical network is very precarious, outdated, and they're very concerned about having more damage to it. So what is VSO technology? What the heck does that stand for? Well, it's variable speed operation. So I'll quickly try to describe this in terms you can understand. Again, if you were to go buy a Sears generator or something, it'd run at 1,800 RPMs because it's making 60 hertz power, three-phase 60 hertz power. If you were in Europe, it'd be running at 1,500 RPMs to make 50 hertz. But your generator has to run at 1,800 RPMs to get that serviceable power into your building. Now, let's say you don't need 100 kW. Let's say it's nighttime, and your building's only using 50 kW or 25 kW. If you were one of these other pieces of this synchronous or some of these other types of generators, it's not like you can go down off 1,800 RPMs. You have to stay at 1,800 RPMs. So what you do is you end up choking the engine, if you will, and introducing inefficiency to depower, and you do what you needed to do. You got your unit down to 50 kW, but your efficiency just goes to heck. Specifically, your electrical efficiency goes way, way, way down. And again, you accomplished it, but it was, the analogy I use is imagine you're driving down the highway, and you got your foot on the gas, and you need to slow down, but you can't take your foot off your gas. So you start pulling up the emergency brake, and it does the job, but it's terribly inefficient. Contrast that with what we're doing. Now, as I said before, the electricity that comes out of our generator is unusable until it goes into our green cabinet. So we can lift our foot up off the gas. We can drop down to 800 RPMs because we clean up all that power that comes out of it after the electronics box. So what that means is this, instead of being stuck at 1,800 RPMs, can go down to 500. It can even ramp up to 2,600, which means the whole operating range of the unit, we call it a 100 kW unit. It's really a 10 to 125 kW unit. You can drop down as low as 10 kW, still with that maximum efficiency, or ramp up to 125 kW with that maximum efficiency, all by varying the engine speed, variable speed operation. And Tecogen, we developed it. We're the only ones that can do that. And it really shows, for folks like you, into additional savings. Because you want to have your maximum efficiency when your building is dark at night and not using a lot of power, and maximum efficiency on that hot July day when everybody's air conditioners are going. You want to have that maximum efficiency. And that, again, equates to dollars and cents. So that was how was that? Did you guys understand that? Okay. Because it is kind of tricky. And again, most other CHP vendors all run at 1,800 RPMs, which is all well and good when they're running at 100. It's just that part load when you drop down that they really start to fall off. You can see that here. This is straight from the NYSERDA catalog. You guys familiar with NYSERDA? No, NYSERDA gives you a big, healthy incentive to install these things. You can see, or maybe you can see, the efficiency of our unit there stays right around 30% all the way down in kW, whereas a synchronous generator that's stuck at 1,800 RPMs, as soon as they start going what's called the part loads, these lower outputs, their electrical efficiency just totally drops off. So what does that mean for savings? This is your classic building profile, okay, throughout the year. And those bars, it's January through December, And you can see they need a lot of heat in the wintertime to heat the building, and not as much in the summertime, because in the summertime, the only thing you need hot water for is to take showers or your laundry or your pool or what have you. So your CHP, here's an important point. You're always going to need a lot of electricity. You know, your building could use 6 of these units in there electrically, but thermally, again, you have to size this to the thermal load, you can only maybe fit 1 or 2 of them. You can't oversize just because your building needs more electricity, because what are you going to do with the heat? You know, you put in 6 units for all your full electrical load, but you've got all this heat that you don't know what to do with. So you want to size these things, and NYSERDA is very particular about this. You size them to your building's thermal load, your heating load, your domestic hot water, your laundry, as I just said. So this is the classic profile, and you can see a lot of heat used in the winter. Summertime it goes down, goes back up again in the winter. And you can see those bars down there. You see the blue line is my 100 kW system. So I'm running happy, you know, full out in the winter months, but in the summer months I gotta ramp it down. I'm actually gonna drop down to 50 kW or 40 kW because there's no place to put the heat. So now I'm at what I refer to as part load again. And that's where the savings is. If we're getting the same efficiency in that little zone as we were in the other zones, that's additional savings you're going to get using our equipment versus something, as I mentioned before, that's not variable speeds, suck at 1,800 RPMs. So I hope that becomes clear, because it's a little nuanced how that works. But there are certainly times of year when you don't need a lot of heat, but you want to use the electricity, and so you want to maintain that maximum savings. We can actually calculate it, and I know I can figure out a Tecogen inverter running at the highest electrical efficiency at 50 kW, because it's the summertime, versus a synchronous generator that's stuck at 1,800 RPMs, whose electrical efficiency drops off at 50 kW. That comes down to efficiency, which come down to numbers. And in this example, I think I used 13 cents electric, which is pretty conservative here in New York. I mean, you're saving an extra $12,000 a year with this variable speed operation. The units, this is a question I get a lot. You know, how long do these units last? You know, my refrigerator lasts 10 years. How long is your cogenerator going to last? The answer is forever. And the reason why is we service these things. As I said, it's very important to service it. We have a service contract, and as long as you keep that service contract in place, it's an all-inclusive service contract. So our guy comes in and changes the oil and changes the plugs and do that. After a year or 2 years, maybe they'll swap out the heads, you know, or something more complex. After 4 or 5 years, they'll swap out the entire engine. Just takes a couple hours. Guy shows up. You're not paying for that. You're not paying an incremental amount for that. You're just paying that flat maintenance contract each year. And so everything eventually gets replaced. So we've got a unit running at Harvard. You know, I'm from Boston. Maybe you could tell from my voice. It's been running 35 years, and it's actually running better than when we installed it because it's received all the upgrades along the way. So the equipment really lasts forever as long as you keep that service contract in place. The example I used here is over 20 years. You know, that's saving a couple $100,000 than if you chose some of these more common synchronous generators. So there's real savings there, and I mean, let's face it, it's all about the savings installing these things. The ROI is what people are really concerned with. By the way, any other questions, feel free to interrupt me. Yeah, please go ahead.
Why would a building go with solar versus cogen?
Good question. So solar's great. Not a lot of real estate here in New York. The equivalent size solar array to do 100 kW is much larger than this room. Probably two times the size of this room. So very difficult to get a significant amount of solar into a building. This unit is pretty compact. I mean, it's like the size of your desk. You can get it into the corner of your boiler room, down the freight elevator in the corner of your boiler room very easily. And so it's more bang for the buck in terms of solar. Now, if you do have solar, and maybe you're a plant, because I was about to talk about this, we can take that solar power, and instead of paying your solar installer all the money to integrate that into your switchgear, what we do is we take that solar power and put it into our unit, and then through our inverter, connect up to your building. So you saved yourself a whole lot of complex installation of the solar because you've already got the CHP in there. You can do the same thing with the battery as well. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay.
So are you saying there would be no gas?
If you had a solar array, obviously doesn't need gas. The CHP system, it runs on natural gas. Yes?
Speaking of ROI, what do these units cost? What's the payback time?
Sure.
Can you tell something about nice service
Yeah.
incentives?
Yes. So I'll give you a real simple example on that. So the equipment costs, let's just pick round numbers here, $150,000. It's going to cost 3 times that to install, okay? The installation of, okay, so let's just bear with me for a minute. Bear with me for a minute, okay? So let's say it's a $500,000 investment, the unit plus the install. It's New York contractors, mechanical, electrical, rigging. You know, I have a gentleman here, maybe Bill left, that knows about all these things. But let's just call it a $500,000 investment, okay? NYSERD is going to give you a check for $180,000. In fact, they're not going to give you a check. They're going to give me the check, and it's going to come off the cost to you. So now your basis is $320,000, okay? You're going to save around $120,000 a year.
$120,000 a year
Yes, in savings.
in a 100-unit building.
Yeah, for one of these units in a little bigger, maybe a 200-unit building.
We have 296-unit buildings. It's still,
You might want to, so everything would scale down by half. Your install would scale down by half, your savings would scale down by half. But sticking with this example of the inverter, the 100 kW one, again, I'm talking real fast and loose, but these are the general numbers just so you have some idea of scale. Call it a $500,000 investment. $180,000 comes off of that, thanks to NYSERDA. So it's a $320,000 investment. You're going to save over $100,000 a year. Your ROI, simple ROI, is around 3 years. Yeah, and then there's tax benefits, and I try not to get into trouble doing people's taxes for them. But there are tax benefits, you know, depreciation, ITC, federal ITC. They can even reduce that payback further. But that's the quickest example.
what's the cost of an annual service contract on average?
So that example I used of your savings, so you're going to save off your electric bill a bunch of money, okay? You're going to save off your boiler from running a bunch of money, so those are your savings. And then you have your costs, okay? Your costs are the cost of the gas to run the thing and the cost of your service contract, and you net those things out, and that's your savings. So I'm answering your question this way because your savings is net of that service contract. So the service contract is billed on a per run hour basis, because if that thing's not running, you're not saving money, and you shouldn't be paying us any service. And if that thing's not running, I'm not making any money because I'm not getting paid for the service contract. So it's on a per run hour basis. So the cost is around $2.50 per run hour is the way the service works. And that, again, is netted out of your savings. When we present you with the savings analysis, you'll see what you save, what the costs are of the gas, what the costs of the service are. Now, some people will say, I don't want to pay for service. Why do I want to pay for service? Who wants to pay for service? I hate getting my car serviced. But if you don't pay for the service, the thing's not going to run. It might run for a little while, but I guarantee you the thing's going to break down, and then you're going to be in more trouble. In fact, NYSERDA knows this. All the incentive agencies know this. The federal know this. They require you to have a service contract to get that NYSERDA incentive. NYSERDA requires a 5-year contract. Smart Start, New Jersey, requires a 10-year contract. But it shouldn't matter because those savings are net of the service contract. Any other questions before I keep going? Yeah.
Last year and the year before, I attended a similar session, and the ROI was about 5 to 6 years. Now you're telling us that it's 3 years. Things have improved, and what would be the secret?
Well, the factors that go into the ROI are the difficulty of the installation. I mentioned the installation. I mean, if your boiler room's nice and open and the switch gear's right there and the boiler's right here and you're going to put the CHP unit here, that's a pretty straightforward installation. And if you're, and of course, it depends on your electric rates as well. So it depends. It depends on what your assumptions are in terms of your inputs for your economic analysis. I use that example of a $500,000 installation, but if that installation was $600,000, your ROI would be more like 4 years. And if your electric rates were a little bit lower, your ROI might be 5 years.
The reason that I ask is that when I presented this to my board 2 years ago, they said they were looking for a better payback period.
Really?
And you're telling us now that it's here.
Well, it again, it depends on your building. If I have to core drill 30 floors to get my exhaust pipe off your roof, your ROI is going to be 10 years. If you've got an existing stack that I can tap into, your ROI would be less. So it really depends. Where's your building?
66 between first and second.
And how many units?
190.
190. And is it steam? Do you have Con Ed steam or do you have your own boiler?
We have on that steam, and we have natural gas.
Okay, interesting. Where you get hung up sometimes, and I don't want to digress too much into this, but if your building has Con Ed steam, that by definition means you don't have a boiler room, right? You don't have a boiler in your building, right?
No, we do have a boiler.
Oh, you do have a boiler, okay, okay. Well, the difficulty comes in, I'll use the example of the Waldorf Astoria. I know it's getting renovated now, but a few years back, we looked at that. They were off Con Ed steam. They don't have a boiler in their building. They don't have an exhaust pipe in their building. There was no place to put it. Yeah, so that's an example of something that may cost more. It's really building the building. Usually with 5 or 6 questions about a building, I can narrow down what kind of ROI they'd be looking at. I don't think I want to go into the full microgrid, except to say our unit is really the brains of any microgrid installation where you're integrating solar and battery as well. The battery integration is particularly important and something we're rolling out here in New York, because when you're doing that maintenance interval, ideally you'd like to continue to put power to the building and not have the unit go down and your Con Ed meter spike. So what you do is you integrate a battery that carries you through a maintenance interval, so you still have that electric generation to the building all year round. Yeah.
What happens when it's having maintenance without the
Yeah.
battery?
You have a battery there that can carry you through that.
Yeah, what about heat?
Well, again, no, if the cogen unit goes down, if the janitor wanders by and hits the emergency stop button, well, the building's not going to go dark and your showers aren't going to go cold. You'll just get more import from the utility to make up the electrical load, and your boiler's going to turn on to keep your hot water going. So there's an inherent redundancy of the grid and of your boiler, but as I said, this is base loading it. You want this CHP unit to be the first call for electrons and the first call for heat. And if you need more electrons, there's Con Ed, and if you need more heat, there's your boiler. But you're base loading it to the most efficient piece of equipment in your building, which is the CHP unit. This is the emissions technology. And you can see that we're down the bottom left there, right on par with the fuel cell. Engines, basic engine technology right now is much higher. In fact, that red bar would probably go through the roof here. Not a problem for here in New York. They don't have regulations. In California, you can't run this stuff in California without meeting these emissions. California determined that the reason there's air quality problems in Los Angeles and Southern California, it's not the 6 million cars driving around. It's the 100 cogen units I have installed in California. I'm being facetious, of course. But they have very strict emissions regulations, CARB, California Air Resource Board. So they required us to develop this system, and we did. And fortunately, we did. Now we can continue to operate in California. But as I tell people in New York, the day's coming. Massachusetts, where I'm from, has adopted similar CARB regulations. New Jersey's starting to develop them, and it's only a matter of time before New York is going to have these same CARB-like standards for emissions for engines. And as I tell people, you're getting it out of the box. It's not like I'm upcharging for it. It kind of comes stock with our equipment. So you don't have to worry about any of these emissions regulations coming east. This is very important. So you want the thing running all the time, but we can't see it. So how do we make sure it's running? Well, the answer is we have all of the sensors on there that we need to see the important things like temperature, pressure, flow, oil, all that. And that all comes to our headquarters, to our control center. And we have the entire fleet. It's kind of neat, all these TVs up there. It's great for like Super Bowl Sunday. But all of our fleet is accessible with one click away, so you can see how the system's running. If there's an alarm, if something goes wrong with the system, our service technician gets a little bada bink on their phone. They'll bring up the system on their tablet or mobile device. They'll see everything they need to see about it, ideally be able to troubleshoot an error and fix it and get it back up and running without even need to leave the building, without even need to do dispatch. Or they can do dispatch, contact one of our technicians on a van, see their inventory, see how far away they are, get someone there quickly. It's all about communication. And we've got this cloud-based system with this company called GE, you might have heard of, that allows us to do that. I've got an app on your phone, but the property manager, I'll give them a little tablet with the app installed on it so they can see and they can show on their condo board meeting, hey, look, remember that cogeneration project I talked you guys into? Well, look, it's actually saving you this much. This is how much it saved you this much. This is how much it's been running. It paid itself off this time. So that information is very important, particularly to building owners, but also to my service people so they can see it. Dashboards, we customize these dashboards depending on what the customer wants to look at, KW, et cetera. You can plug your electric rates right into this little app on your phone, and it can show you the savings. You plug in your electric rate, plug in your gas rate, you see your savings. Very neat stuff. And again, this is what you see on the monitors when our service guys walk into their service buildings here in New York, and what I see when I walk into our headquarters in Waltham. The complete status of everything. When I walk in, I want to know how everything's running. And just to show you I'm not lying, I mean, there's some red ones there. No, red ones are in alarms. There's always going to be alarms. And you treat those by getting people there and fixing them. This is the M&V analytics. You know, NYSERDA wants to make sure that you're performing as promised. You mentioned the NYSERDA incentive. The reason the NYSERDA incentive comes to me and not to you, you get the incentive, it's just that it comes off your price tag. But the reason they give me the incentive is because if that unit doesn't perform, as I said it was going to perform in my proposal, they're going to come for the money back from me, not from you, from me. So I have to stand by all of my analysis. I have to stand by all my savings, all the M&V is measurement and verification. I have to stand by all my M&V, otherwise NYSERDA is going to ask me for their money back. So that keeps the industry on the up and up. And I think it's a good model. As I mentioned, we've got our fleet here. Our technicians hate it because I can track them wherever they are. But it's important to see where they are. And again, if there's an alarm or something, the service manager can see, okay, I've got somebody here, they've got the part in the van, they don't have to cross the GW bridge because that guy is over there, so I'll get somebody there. So it's very important, just like any service dispatch, to get their people there quickly with the parts that they need to get the thing back up and running. So it really is a great fit in New York. We have more units here in New York than anybody else. We kind of pioneered this inverter-based interconnect thing. The results being, as I mentioned, that building in the Lower East Side that ran during an outage. We do have a building that ran during the outage. It is its own microgrid. I mentioned this microgrid before. This beer distributorship in Brooklyn has no Con Ed wires going to the building at all. They're completely off-grid. But they've got 6 of our units there that are providing all the power to the building. And they kept their power all through Sandy, and they were able to keep the beer flowing, and I like to take credit for no riots happening in New York because of that. But we certainly have more experience than anyone else, and that's important because we have our techs all over the place, running around in our vans, maintaining them. And I'll show you a couple examples in just a minute. Oh, I'll show you examples right now. So I just picked a few random ones. This is the Princeton Club right in Midtown. It's got 3 of the units installed. This is our older, we call it the inverter. Our new one's the E+, but this is a similar type unit. They're installed on the roof. They displace steam. This building had Con Ed steam. They were paying through the nose for that steam. So they installed our CHP system, of course, for the electricity, but mainly to get them off that Con Ed steam. So they're getting almost all of their heat from the CHP units. It's located above a couple of hotel rooms. And so there was concern, oh my God, you got to keep the guests up at night? But no, I mean, these things aren't that loud. 60 dB at 20 feet. But we installed, spring isolators and neoprene pads and all that, so the actual running of it doesn't affect people below it, particularly in residential buildings. Yeah.
Are they reciprocating or turbine?
Yeah, the reciprocating engines. Yeah, I started off with that, but it's a good question because there are turbines out there, and Capstone's the most notable one. And it's a good product. I think the turbines as the mover for the generator, what we're talking about. This is a reciprocating engine moves the generator as opposed to a turbine like a jet engine moving the generator. The things they have going for it, they need less service. They can stay on for a long time. That's why jets use jets. The downside is they're much more expensive. They require high pressure gas, and high pressure gas in New York City gets safety concerns. People think about safety concerns. They're really best suited for these remote locations where you don't have to worry about high pressure gas, you don't have to worry about fire concerns, et cetera, in service. But yeah, they're reciprocating engines. Yes.
Several years ago, I was looking into the question of going from getting off Con Ed steam and going from gas to generating electricity. And one of the arguments that was presented at the time was that Con Ed never lets you go.
Yeah.
Even if you get off most of the steam, you still have to stay on
Standby charge.
Standby. And what is the status of standby charges?
Right. Well, there's 2 things. There's electrical standby charges and steam standby charges. And what he's referring to is if I installed 300 kW here, Con Ed could say, yeah, but if that cogen unit goes down, you're still going to need me to be there. So I'm going to charge you a standby charge to be ready for you. There's no electrical standby charges beneath a megawatt. So we don't have to worry about electrical standby charges. Now, steam, they absolutely do get you. That's why they had to get entirely off steam. They had to cap their steam pipe because if their steam usage went from here to here, and you're just paying for this, but they're going to say, no, because if that cogen unit goes down, you're still going to need that big chunk of steam, so I'm going to charge you the standby charge.
There's still no change in the policy about standby charges for steam.
I'm trying to make change, but no. Yeah, you have to cap
You
it.
have to cap it.
Okay.
Or live with the
So
standby.
they still got you.
Yeah, it still got you a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yes.
When you're putting these on roofs, A, how do you get the gas up there? And B, are most roofs capable of handling the load?
Sure. So it is always a decision where to put it. If you can put it in your basement, that'd be best, because that's usually where the electrical is. That's oftentimes where your boiler plant is, and everything's there. But sometimes you got to put it on the roof. So you can run gas up there. In fact, we've got this building we're working on right now on the east side. It's two buildings that are connected by common space. We're putting one on each of the roofs. And they had a choice. They could either put it in their basement and use their existing gas service to run it, but then they didn't get that gas discount. Remember I said the gas discount you get for cogen? Or they could run a gas line up to the roof, which is going to cost money, but then they get the discounted gas. So they chose to run it up to the roof and get the discounted gas. There was an ROI of about 1.5 years to do that. So to answer your question, you find a chase and you run gas up there. And then electrically, usually you can tap in, usually there's an elevator bank that you can tap into that electrical infrastructure to get back down to the switchgear in the basement. So there's ways of doing it. And you try to find all the tricks, but sometimes they add up, to your point, right? Or your point, sorry. Sometimes the installation costs start to add up and the ROI starts to expand. You do your best. You do your best.
When putting it in the basement, do the units disassemble from that big box which won't fit?
They do. They do. So we build them in our facility, test them in our facility, and then if need be, break them down, put them on skids. They show up here in about 10 different skids, and then our service techs put them back together again. Very common, because as you know, boiler rooms are very small and cramped, and getting down there is not easy. So that was one example. Here's another one, the Weston, Jersey City. This was a heck of a rig. You're talking about the roof. This was, I saw pictures. I wish I was there of the big crane to put it up there, because you can't use helicopters now in the metropolitan area anymore. So it has to be cranes to rig these things. But in this case, they put in, again, 3 units. Those 3 units run all the time in the wintertime. In the summertime, they don't use enough heat to use the output from all 3 units. So they installed what's called a trigen system, and I won't go into too much detail except to say you can use these additional pieces of equipment called air conditioner absorbers that take the hot water and convert it into air conditioning. Extremely inefficient in doing so. But it's a place to use the hot water. It adds about 1 year to your ROI. But in this case, the corporate ownership of the hotel decided that they wanted it, that the savings was worth it. So these units run all year round. In the winter months, providing heat to the building. In the summer months, to provide heat and air conditioning to the building. It's called a trigen system, trigeneration. And the view is great from up there on the top of that building. The Bavort is the one I mentioned that ran during the outage. They installed these 3 units just thinking about saving money. Weren't really thinking about resiliency till the lights went out. And then they realized that they have power and they could keep their lights on. All their buildings, relatives and friends all swamped the building for 6 days while they were out of power, and they were able to keep their lights on. So much so that the neighboring building, another Bavort, the Bavort West maybe, I don't know. We just finished an installation there, and they put in 4 units. They put in even a larger size plant because they wanted that resiliency piece also. And then the Torin, yeah.
If you have a humongous generator already, you can get rid of it, right?
Yeah, you don't need it. Yeah, right. The generator is superfluous now. And the thing about a generator is is it diesel? I mean, most generators are diesel. And it's gas, okay. But the generator does not have an ROI. You invest in that generator, you never get that money back again. Now, it's nice when the power goes out and you keep your lights on, but this has an ROI. CHP has an ROI. It pays itself off, again, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what your inputs are. And you're getting that backup piece for free. So, right, you don't need the generator. Now, you can keep the generator and supplement it. Maybe run some of your fire pumps off it or something, but you're going to base load your building's power to the capacity of the CHP system.
I understood that Con Ed requires you to buy a certain percentage of your base load even if you've got a system.
There's different tariffs that you can subscribe to. So you can subscribe to a tariff that says I'm going to buy this much electricity, and if you need more than that, you pay a little bit more through the nose. Or most people just have the normal tariff. So very savvy CHP owners that really think about the economics will put in a CHP system and then subscribe to this new, it's called a standby tariff, that shows them how much they can use, and they'll know they'll not go beyond that. So that is true if you subscribe to that tariff.
So do you guys have a model to optimize the economics? In fact, now you've mentioned
We do.
solar.
We do.
We absolutely do.
We
And
absolutely
you
do.
have a solar module also, so you can
Well,
optimize the whole thing?
The solar piece is like is an add-on that it's an option. But the fundamental economics of CHP will show you after we model your building and profile your building. You say again, this is how much you're going to save from electricity. This is how much you're going to save from heat. If you run the unit in this certain way and subscribe to this tariff, you can save a little bit more. We've been enrolling some of these things in demand response. Let's take that example of that Westin Hotel. Remember I said it has 3 units running in the wintertime to provide heat, and in the summertime they don't need as much heat, they put in these absorbers. Well, if they did not put in those absorbers, those other 2 units would turn off in May, right, because they don't need them. So in those cases, I say, well, enroll them in demand response. So now you've got 200 kW of capacity. Do you all know what demand response is? It's when the grid gets really congested. Con Ed wants you to reduce how much electricity that you're using. And so you can enroll in a demand response program where they'll pay you money to reduce how much electricity you use. So when the phone rings, you can either run around and unplug everything, right? Or you turn on your generator and you reduce how much electricity that you're using. And they pay good money for that, particularly in certain areas of New York. And so if you have those 2 units that are not running now, again, the example of the Westin, because there's no heat, but you enroll it in demand response, when the phone rings, you just go, actually, your phone's not going to ring, my phone's going to ring. I'll just bring them up, and then presto, you've got 200 kW of demand response money, and around $50,000 of revenue, just for being able to respond when the phone rings. So demand response programs and the economics that they're in are part of our economic analysis.
You're using the terms heat and domestic hot water. Are you using them interchangeably or just for domestic hot
No,
water?
I'm separating the two because heat is what heats your building, and domestic hot water is your shower.
So if you've got a boiler that's producing steam for your heat, that may or may not be also doing your domestic hot water, is this producing steam?
No, it doesn't produce steam.
No, it doesn't produce steam.
It produces hot water. So if you have steam, if your building
is steam heated.
Steam heated, not Con Edison steam.
Yeah.
If you
If you got a steam boiler,
it's
it's
an
an important point. I'm glad you mentioned it.
This
does not make steam.
Okay.
Okay? So if your building is steam heated, we can't provide that heat for those winter months because you heat with steam. Now, we can provide that domestic hot water
Because the way you get
your hot water is a heat exchanger.
That's an important point.
If your building heats with hot water, we can heat your building with our CHP. If your building heats with steam, we can only heat your hot water for domestic hot water.
So when you were talking ROI, was that on domestic hot water or hot water heating for the
My
My example of the ROI was
hot water heating.
heating. So you're using it as the heat the
So
building.
the ROI is much less for steam.
I don't think
I don't think the ROI would be less.
The difference would be
is if you got a 500 unit building
and you heat
and you
with
heat with hot water,
I can install
maybe 3 units,
right?
to run that.
But if
that building is heating with steam,
and then the
only heat I can take care of is domestic hot water, I can only install 1.
I could install 3, but they're not going to be running
as much.
So
I think the ROI will be the same. It's just that your plant size will shrink to your domestic hot water load if you
So
follow.
does your unit size, minimum unit requirement for efficiency go up if you're not using it for heat?
Put differently, the size of your building has to be big enough so that it's got a domestic hot
Okay,
water
so
load.
let me ask you directly.
Yeah.
What size building for domestic hot water use only?
Around
200 units.
200 units.
200 units.
But if
And
you
if you heat with hot water,
you
you could probably get away with 125, 150 units. It's a good question. That shows you're getting it. Yeah, so the Torin, you guys have probably seen the Torin. It's big, you can't miss it, right? You're on Flatbush. But they have 5 of our units there. In fact, the entrepreneur that installed this, it's not the building that owns this. There's an entrepreneur that bought the space in the building, installed the CHP plant, and sells the energy back to the building. So it's actually owned by somebody other than the building itself. That's a model that some people are using. There's another model out there where a building really wants this, but they don't have any money, they don't have a capital budget. So there are ways you can install this with 0 cost, where we have a financing partner that would come in, they'd pay for the installation at no cost to the building. and then they would own the asset and sell the energy back to you at a discount. So you're saving a little bit of money. They're getting the bulk of the savings because they did the investment, and they pay off their investment in 4 or 5 years' time, and it's usually like a 15 or 20-year commitment to this third party. So there are zero cost. That's the solar model. That's the way the solar guys mostly do it, zero cost installation. So a lot of people think, yeah, zero cost, let's go that way. But then when they start to see the savings, of that $120,000 a year of savings, 100 of it's going to the third party, and only 20 is going to the building. And so they say, well, actually, I think I can come up with the money. I can get a loan or something to install it. But again, there are like YMCAs and JCCs that don't have a capital budget. They'll go to a zero-cost installation. So that's what I have. Happy to answer any questions. I know there's a lot, but we're in booth 302, right over there. Our salesman brought all of his Halloween candy. I hate it when he does that because we end up eating it. But we can actually see there in our booth, we've got a mock-up of what the unit looks like. You can open up the panels. You can kind of see what the engine looks like, get an idea of the dimensions, get a feel for what it might look like in your building. Any other questions?
Sorry.
We looked into this issue several years ago. We had a consultant come in and said, well, the unit should go in the basement and we should build a 19-story chimney to exhaust.
So they probably had Con Ed steam, therefore they didn't have a boiler, therefore they didn't have an existing
There is
flow.
no boiler. Yes, we do have Con Ed steam.
Oh, okay.
Frankly, it was prohibited to put up a 19-story chimney. Now, you say, well, this could go on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have in our building, we have gas for the ovens and stoves.
Yep.
All the way up to the top floor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any impediment to putting this on the roof?
You need a bigger gas line. The cooking gas isn't enough to run this, and the pipe size of the cooking gas isn't enough to run.
Okay, so what kind of where would you suggest that the gas line go? I assume it's putting a 19-story chimney.
Yeah, sometimes we can, again, it all comes down to finding a chase in your building. In most buildings, you can find a part of the elevator shaft. There's a large complex of buildings we're doing in the Lower East Side. There's 7 buildings.
Diameter of the...
You probably need about 12 square inches.
12. They had an old, what's it called, a garbage chute, whatever they call it, incinerator chute.
Yeah.
Compactor is used, obviously.
So you can sometimes use that space to go up and down. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, we had a co-op, 105 units in Napa.
Okay.
And we are looking at cogen, and we tried to do gas, but the gas company was going to charge us like $1 million. To your point, sir.
Yeah.
It was too narrow of a passage. So we're looking to do that. Do you have any access to people that would finance something like this?
Yes, absolutely.
And in fact, if you really kind of hold Con Ed's toes to the fire a bit, you can sometimes get them, or even some of the other gas utilities, get them to run gas close to your building, to the sidewalk, and then you just pay for the gas run from the sidewalk into the building. That's the case of this one on the Lower East Side, these 7 buildings. Con Ed's going to run gas to the sidewalk, and then I just have to trench from the sidewalk to the building, or the building pays for this trenching from the sidewalk to the building.
Okay, because they were offering to bring it to the bottom of this hill.
Okay.
They wanted literally $1 million to bring it up
Yeah.
to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So we don't finance that, but I absolutely know a whole cadre of people that do project finance like that.
Okay, so, great. So
Yeah.
do you come out and
So
do the project?
I'm glad you asked that question, because how does it work? What do I do now? Right? So this is how it works. If you think your building is a good fit for cogen, you talk to somebody, like myself or some of the guys that are over at booth 302 again, and we'll get some idea of your building. In fact, I've got these 5 quick questions you ask to see if your building's a fit for cogen. You can take one if you want. But how many units in your building?
103.
Yeah, okay. So these are the questions. How many units in your building? Do you already have natural gas? Do you have an existing boiler, therefore maybe a stack?
Do you have an existing boiler?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I got it. Sure. But there are generic questions, about 5 generic questions you can ask of somebody about their building to say, okay, you're a fit, or you're not a fit. Sorry, you're just not a fit. And so once you get those 5 questions answered, Then you say, okay, what I'd really like to see now is your utility bills. I'd like to see a year's worth of your electric usage and a year's worth of your gas bills. Because that's going to, you remember my little graph, maybe you weren't here for it, that's going to give you this profile of exactly what your building looks like, thermally and electrically. And then I'll size the CHP system based on that. I'll come up with a ballpark installation cost. I'll see what your electric rates are and your gas rates are. So I'll see what your savings are, and I'll give you a proposal that says, okay, it's going to cost this much to install. It's going to save this much a year. Here's your ROI. And if that's compelling enough, and that's all done without even setting foot in your building. This is all done interactively. And if that's compelling enough, then we actually visit your building and start looking around the boiler room and really start to sharpen a pencil is exactly what it looks like. Then we develop a full proposal for the building to look at, and that's how you progress. But it all starts with these 4 or 5 questions about your building that can quickly determine if you're a fit for CHP or not. So your building, 100 units, you have gas, you've got a boiler. Here's another question. Is it master metered or is everybody sub-metered?
Sub-metered.
But is there one, is it, let's see, there's master metered and then sub-metered, but then there's all sub-meters.
It's master metered, and then we all have sub-meters.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I was just curious because, okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
You might be a fit for a smaller system, that 35 kW system. But again, I'm an advertisement here. Go to booth 302,
Okay.
and our guys are way smarter than I am. Can help you out and take some of the candy off our shelf while you're at it. Any other questions? I still got some time. Anything at all? Astros fans? Dodgers fans? No?
Yankees fans.
Yankees.
If you're in
That
New
sounds
York.
right. You guys did better than us. I was rooting for the Yankees. The Red Sox. Yeah, I don't mind. It's a good bunch of players. It's not the old Yankees. I like the Yankees.
There you go.
Okay. Well, again, feel free to ask me any more questions after I finish up, or I'll be over in booth 302 if you like as well. Thanks.